Sí, parece que ya estamos en directo, así que nada. Sorry. So we are live, actually. Sorry. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, anyone watching live now or later. It is my absolute pleasure to be joined tonight by the delightful Livia J. Elliot. Livia, how are you?
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. So very happy
No,
that you invited me.
no, my pleasure. And that was an absolute slip of the tongue starting the conversation because off camera we were talking in Spanish and I just carried on after I pressed the button, which is a ridiculous thing, actually. I think that we're having this conversation in English because, in
Yeah.
case people don't know you, you are originally from Argentina.
Argentina. Yeah, that's true. So Spanish is my main language. And as a bit of trivia, I actually learned English on my own when I was 8 years old or something. Classical thing of learning from song lyrics and so on. So
Wow. Oh, that is very impressive. I actually went for what my parents made me go to lessons from the age of 6 until 18, and then when I was 18, I
yeah.
moved to the UK. But no. So you must have a very, very sharp mind, unlike myself. So I know you said that. Okay, so just very briefly, how did you end up from Argentina, literally traveling to the opposite end of the world in Australia?
Oh, it's the most boring and common answer because of work. I
So
mean,
because of what you travel halfway around the
yeah.
world.
So I was living in Argentina with my partner at that moment, and we said like we don't like where this is going. We wanted to, work and be able to progress. And I'm fortunate to have an education that allowed me to travel. So I started applying for positions overseas. I had a couple countries as a target. So I was aiming for Canada, New Zealand, or Australia. And I got a position in Australia and I came here. I have been through a number of cities since then. So
And how long have you been living in Australia for now?
hmm, I think it's been 5 years already. And I
Five
still
years.
don't get the slang.
Ah, no,
It's very,
all you have to watch is Heartbreak High if that's still going.
yeah.
If that's still going on telly. But so you're a bit of a superhero. So during the day you work as a software developer,
Yep.
and by night
I'm
you
a wannabe writer.
want to be writer. There's a lot of those around,
I'm
but
podcaster. Yeah.
and podcaster. But so we can talk about those two things. Um, hang on. Let's talk about the podcast first, because
Yeah.
then I'm intrigued about your writing. But so how did the whole podcasting thing come about?
So I generally really love discussing books. When I was a kid, my parents had this policy of pick whatever you want from the library. But if I picked a book, they would probably just ask me what I read or, ask me questions about the books that I was reading to explain them. And that stuck with me. I really enjoy, discussing and deep diving into the books, finding meaning or things that I can learn from it, especially because I like to read things that are generally considered not relatable because I seek perspectives that are not my own. And of course, because I like to do that, I generally find a new book and then I go to friends or partner like, look at this thing, shiny new thing that I found. And I just spend like an hour or so talking about them. And one day I was doing just that and my partner told me like, you should do a podcast and discuss books like this. And the idea stuck with me. And I went to Varsha from Peshchuin, reading by the rainy mountain. And I just wanted to know a couple of things about podcasting as a whole. And she was like, complete an enabler type. This is a microphone that you need. This is what you need to do. This is a software. You will need this and this and that. And basically she gave me everything. And after that, I just said like, why not? Let's get started. And I started doing the deep dives, the solo episodes that I keep doing monthly. And after that, I also wanted to know, to me at least, even if I have like my own interpretation of what I read in the books, I generally find that the author's intention is very important as well, whatever they decide. So I wanted to know more about that. That's why I started interviewing people with the spotlight and the group series of episodes, the guest talks. That's basically guests discussing books, as you have been there for a bit. So
Yeah.
basically, it's just I think an extension of how I read books and how I enjoy them, and
So, where can people find your podcast? And so, where is it available? What's the name? Where can people find it?
so the podcast is titled Books Undone, and it's on every single podcasting platform. So Spotify, Apple, um, everything they are in iTunes. Sorry, it's also on Audible if you have, and it's free everywhere. And it's also on YouTube. So my handle on YouTube is Livia J Elliot, and if you Google that, you will get all the episodes. Doesn't have video, it's just the audio, so you can go and
Yeah.
listen to it. And yeah, every episode is free, so it doesn't have advertisement anything, so you can just listen.
Yeah, and I have to say, Livia, I've had the absolute pleasure of joining your podcast on a couple of occasions, and
your comments were spot on.
no, I'm not here to. I'm not here to say how witty I may or may not be. I'm here to say when you say deep dive and talking about a book, there's certainly that. I mean, I feel very stupid joining those conversations because you're getting us to read classic short stories by Argentinian writer Borges. And last time, over 6 pages of text, we spent an hour,
1 hour and 20,
trying to figure out what's going on, and I just feel totally clueless there.
Oh, boy is here.
Evening or afternoon or morning, whatever time it is. Yeah, and what's I
and
say?
Those stories, I think they may not be pure fantasy, the ones that we were discussing, but they are so speculative. And the first one that we discussed, House Taken Over, it's just self-updating. I don't know how to say it. It's so open that it keeps having a lot of meaning through time, and I just love discussing that.
Yeah, and to be honest, I really enjoy those kind of conversations because I think one of the page 2 in Friday conversations a few weeks, months ago, I don't know who we were talking to, but it's kind of like podcasts or conversations like these have replaced the old-fashioned sit around having a cup of coffee at a bar, a conversation. I think television, Netflix killed that kind of way of interacting with people. Yeah. And luckily, this format has arrived to enable, people like you and me, half a world away, to be able to sit down and have a chat about the things that we enjoy.
Yeah, I think in generally, no technology is inherently good or bad. It's just how we use it, And internet and all of this has enabled all these type of conversations. And I think it's great, especially in the book sphere, because we get so many different point of view, sometimes simply because where we are, where we have been, the definition of who we are.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like I've said it many times before, so anyone that is going to hear this again one more time. But I live in a small town on the east coast of Spain. So who do I get to talk to? These big fantasy epics that I like to read. I don't know if you find the same. Like who you're going to find in Australia to discuss Argentinian literature.
So we have a couple known authors, especially traditional published in fantasy. We have Garth Nix and so on, but I don't think they know I exist, And sometimes it's when you have the whole world open, it's so easy to find like-minded people and to enjoy the different points of view as well. So
yeah,
even if the scheduling the meeting can be difficult.
Yeah, no, but I really enjoy those conversations because we've had obviously this you over there, this Jared who's in the US, Susanna is in Ireland.
Ireland,
Varsha lives
it's
in the
also
US.
in the US. Yeah,
Yeah,
also in
yeah.
the US.
And I think we've had Paramita before.
No, we
Oh
haven't.
no, well, okay. It's just too many conversations. I just get lost in them. Right. So there's that. And so what's your experience been like with the whole podcast thing? Did you get any what's the word I'm looking for? Some kind of pressure to get like downloads, number of reproductions? Do you check that too often?
Not really. So when I started the podcast, I just wanted to show how I read books and I wanted to put up my ideas about the books that I read out there. So I don't really pick books because they are trendy. If you see my podcast, I don't do TBRs, I don't do hauls. TBRs stress me. I don't do hauls or unhauls. I don't do rants. I generally just do deep dives and analysis, and some are not books that are right now popular. For example, from Stephen Erickson, I read Rejoice, and it's not his most popular book. Everybody knows him because of Malazan,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I just pick something that I like and I do that, and that's it. That's genuinely what I like and what I like to read, right? And for the short stories on Borges and Cortázar that we are doing, the idea behind those was like, I remember when I read one of those the first time, I was like 15 years old. I read it and I was just like, what is this? And I read them again years after. I really like them, but it's not something that it's mainstream right now. They may have been authors that are now very important for the fantasy genre in terms of magical realism and slipstream, but they are not very well known. So that's something that I wanted to tackle, especially because they are from my home country. But yeah, to answer your question more specifically, I really don't look at the stats. Yeah, I would like to, I have a small goal of reaching 100 subscribers in YouTube at least, but it's not something that decides the content that I'm going to put up, right? If I pick a book, I pick it because I like it, and that's it. Like, for example, I think the only really mainstream thing that I did is my last episode, which is a Stormlight archive. And I interpreted the Stormlight archive using something that I really like, which is a Stoic philosophy. It's not a
Right.
very popular combination of topics, but I think that's the only important thing that I have, or mainstream thing that I have
No,
tackled
but
there.
that's interesting. I think probably certainly pitching it to a different sector of the fantasy reading
I
market
think
than
so, yeah.
yeah. It's an interesting take. Obviously, I haven't read the Stormlight archive, but to bring in some kind of sort of philosophical framework to sort of attach to it is it's a very interesting situation. The thing I found, and some like I've given up. I feel a bit frustrated, but I've given up. Is that I don't understand the algorithm, or maybe it's just me. But like today, I found out there was someone that has got on the BookTube channel like me, sort of similar number of subscribers. We just both happen to have interviewed the same author, and he's got like 4 or 5 times more views on his interview than I do. And it's like, oh, but it's the same author. Like, why?
Why?
I'm guessing that he's getting promoted more because like the subscriber base is the same, or maybe I haven't. There's something I haven't done, maybe, or I don't know what it is, but I have to give up and just
Yeah, I think that in terms of content creation, it's always a fight against the algorithm and whatever the brand of the platform wants to push up. That's why I said, like, I'm not going to stress, because if I stress over being viewed and so on, then I will just lose the love for it, right? And I really enjoy my podcast, and that's I think I want to prioritize that and doing content that I truly like and support rather than chasing the algorithm. It's completely fine doing that as well, right? It's just a different take on a channel. It's just not the one that I want to pursue.
But I suppose I don't know if you know sorry, but la pescadilla que se muerde la cola. I don't know the equivalent expression in English, but
Yeah.
it's a vicious circle because the more downloads you've got, the more subscribers you've got, the more power you've got to reach out to authors or publishers or agents or whoever and have more of those interesting conversations that you want to have.
It doesn't. I understand that, and I see why it's appealing. Sometimes it's a bit frustrating because doing a solo episode takes me a lot. And for example, that conversation from Borges, it took me about 12 hours of editing and setting up and everything else because I savagely edit everything. And then it has fewer views. And for example, one of my shorts, I put up a short of Totoro earrings and I got like 400 views in a single day. And I was just like, what? And I actively choose not to be bothered by it, and I really enjoy doing my episodes, and that's what matters. And that's what I want to pursue. At the end of the day, I think that the people that sticks because of the content, or perhaps it's a naive view, will just stick for the content, At the end of the day, I never opened the podcast just to live from the podcast or to be famous because of it. I opened it just to have an outlet for my type of discussions.
Okay, you just made me think of two questions I got for you. So number one, because I've started a podcast now as well. Although I'm battling with Apple Podcasts, I don't know why it's not uploading to that platform, but anyway. But I'm not editing anything. Like, this conversation is gonna go as it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
What are you editing? What are you spending 12 hours editing on the last episode? Like, what is there to edit?
I kill all of the as I said, and then I reduce noise and I try to reduce the echo in the room, like filtering the voices.
Yeah.
That's basically, so I don't really chop content. I just chop some people that I have interviewed. They make a lot long pauses, and sometimes that is acceptable in a video because you have the visual cue of the person is thinking, right? But if you go full audio and suddenly you have a post like that, it feels weird, right? Podcasts that are purely audio needs to have a better dynamic. That's what I went also for a podcast and not for video, because that way I can just be on my pajamas with my microphone up to here and recording,
Fair
And
enough.
I just focus on having the best quality that I can have on audio. I have been doing some improvements and I want to change the microphone and other stuff. So little by little, because it's not like I have any revenue for it.
No, it's like any hobby, isn't it? You can chuck as much money into it as
I can.
As you can want, isn't it? So then those, like, I've never done. I cannot even imagine doing me on my own episode. Like, how do you approach those? Do you script it all out, and do you end up reading some kind of essay thing, or you've got just some pointers that you elaborate and sort of free flow as you go along?
So it's different depending the type of episode that I'm doing. For the group discussions and the spotlights, what I basically do is I will read the story or whatever we are doing. I don't interview people whose books I haven't read. Everything that I'm interviewing, I have read it and generally rated it 4 stars plus. So I script like the opening, the ending, and then I script some questions. And while the person is talking, I generally will just take some notes and do follow-ups so I can follow on that. But the discussions and the group talks, those are more organic. The ones that I generally do myself, those are different because I generally pick quotes from the books and start analyzing them. And for example, the one that is going to come, it's actually Death Stranding, the novelizations, which are 2 books. So I was like the meme, with all the red lines, like picking quotes from 2 different books in different orders just to make a story on the thing. And yeah, so for those solo episodes, those are scripted. And it takes me generally besides reading the book, it generally takes me about 5 hours to script an episode, depending on the type of content that I want to put up. If I need to go and find extra information, because, for example, when I did Flowers for Algernon, I went in to find some papers from discussing the specific illness that the main character has, so I could quote some real life doctors saying what they were saying. right? And same with Death Stranding, I went in and found some sociologists and psychologists speaking about the specific theme that I'm going to speak about, which is human connections, and I added that. So doing that small additional research, it takes so much time. The ones that I'm doing as a solo, because I'm reading the script when I record them, I generally need less editing because I'm just reading and it's easier, you know.
You just made me feel very inadequate with the amount of research and preparation that you do for your
I'm
episodes,
sorry.
which I think is more the reason for anyone watching this now or listening later, whatever, to go and check your podcast out, because it really does sound really interesting, except for when I'm there. But anyway, so I'm
Thank
assuming
you.
you always had an interest and a passion or a love for reading from a young age, right? Just like everyone
Yeah.
that I end up talking
Yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah. I think I started reading when I was taught to read and write very young. And I think I started reading when I was 7, 8 years, different stuff. And I didn't really have access to children's books. So I had to just pick up whatever was available. I couldn't actually spend in new books. Fortunately, my parents had a large library, so I could pick from there. And I think I went through every single genre. The first thing that I really liked, I'm talking about 10 years old or something like that, were mysteries. Like, I really liked mysteries. And the first mystery that I loved was the Baskerville Hound from Sherlock Holmes.
Mhm.
The Sherlock Holmes story, just loved it. It was like, I remember, the surprise that I had when I was reading it. I can barely remember the story because I haven't reread it, but I remember the surprise that I had when everything unfolded. From there, I went to read supernatural mysteries, and after 3-4 years, I was bored of that. And by that time, my dad was actually looking at watching Dune, the old series and everything that had been shot up, and I got interested on it. I was curious about it, especially because I watched a lot of Star Trek. And he gave me the book. He had the first book. It was a translation of Dune. So that's the first sci-fi that I read. Well,
Mhm.
sci-fantasy that I read. And after that, I found on my parents' libraries, I found Space Odyssey from Arthur C. Clarke. And that's
Mhm.
it. That I just felt into it. I loved sci-fi. Sci-fi was, I think, my first literally love. At the same time, I read a lot of historical fiction. Not the historical fantasy style that is more trendy right now. I'm saying books that took the author 20 years to research just to try to make accurate.
Mm.
The one that I really, really liked about that one was I Am Claudius, the Roman
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
biography, story, whatever, of the
Mhm.
Emperor Claudius, and the following up that I really liked. And yeah, that's how I started. After that, I just kept reading. I generally read anything I read. I'm not reading in terms of fiction. For now, I'm just keeping to fantasy and sci-fi because you can imagine between the job, the podcast, and trying to write, I don't have much free time. So I need to stay within something specific, and I don't have much space either to hold the physical books. But I also read nonfiction. When I was young, I was very interested in fiction that was nonfiction, that was more about mysteries or the world or things like that, history in general.
Mhm.
I'm currently very fond of reading books about nonfiction about philosophy, political philosophy, or war in general. I really like reading about war and the cause,
Yeah.
but more on an abstract level. The causes of war, why people war, what is conflict, how you define peace, and so on.
All right. Okay. Very eclectic tastes. And then,
Yes.
so I've got a super cliche question for you, which
Hmm.
possibly our English-speaking audience may not catch on. But being Argentinian, you must have been brought up on the Mafalda comic strips.
I just love them. So for the audience understanding of this, Mafalda is a very old comic from the 70s, 80s in Argentina. And yeah, it's about little children, 6, 8 years old. Those are the characters, but it's a political allegory. And every character is generally has some traits from the society of that moment. And it is a critique to what was happening on it. I just loved it. I loved Mafalda, and I keep loving it. And there are some sections of the comic that I keep using because they are just amazing. And I think it deserves more attention, but I'm not sure whether it was ever translated in English.
So basically, I've got the whole
The
Mafalda
chunk,
collection, right? And I am also doing, I've got like maybe 6 or 7 left, like the Peanuts comic strips, the collected hardbacks.
Yeah.
And I have to say, in my opinion, and what do I know, I think Mafalda is a far superior comic strip than Peanuts. It's very similar.
Yeah.
It's all these little children, but like you said, the philosophy and the social commentary and what the strip is trying to say, I think is much more intellectually highbrow than Peanuts, without not being funny. So it's not a political philosophical comic. It's still a comic.
No, it's funny, and it's funny it's always like Mafalda always has 2 different meanings. If you are reading it quite literally, it has something, you can still laugh at it. But if you know the social context, as anything that is written in that style, it has a whole other layer of meaning and things, and things that you can get from it. So
yeah,
I genuinely loved it when I was young.
Yeah, I just find when I'm reading Peanuts, I may find like a gold nugget, like a little fantastic comic strip after reading, tens, if not hundreds of them. With Mafalda, it was
perfect.
It was a much shorter publishing history, but I think there's a lot more quality there. You could pick any of them at random, and you will have something even relevant to today.
And that's the point. Some of the strips from Mafalda, they are still very relevant, and it's not everything political within it. A lot of it is also just children being children, and friends being friends, because it's a group of children that are friends. So it's a very interesting. Another comic that I really liked when I was young was Asterix. That I will always put them up as magical realism in the Roman history, because they had all these potions and superpowers and so on. And I read them in Spanish, and I think that was actually very nice, because I read one volume in English, and the translation was just a bit off. And I think it's because French translates better to Spanish than to English. But the Asterix from the original collection, I think I read all of them, and I have almost memorized some of the of the passages, because I have read them so much. And then again, it's like Mafalda. You can get one story if you just read the comic, and you can get so much more meaning in the case of Asterix if you know a bit of the problems between the Roman Empire and the Celts.
Asterix works for kids. When I was a kid, I used to read them. One of my uncles had a bunch of them. So every Sunday when we used to go have lunch with my grandparents during siesta time, it was silent time. So I would just go and get my uncle's Asterix comics and just read them there. And I've actually got the collected original 27 issues down there, and a 1,000-piece puzzle that I made last summer, framed there with all the characters from all the stories, the other side of the room.
Amazing.
It is fantastic.
No, actually, when I moved from Argentina to Australia, I of course I could bring. I had to pack my whole life in 2 bags, and some of the things that I wrote were some of my favorite numbers of the Asterix, and some are not mine. They are actually from my mother, so they are very old, very clunky and old, And but I brought them because I love the comics, and I think that. Even right now within the fantasy genre, they could be classified as something half magical, because they have all of these magic powers and things going on.
Well, okay, so only because you mentioned that, But I've got a slight gripe, and I made a video about it a few weeks ago with the whole magical realism thing being applied
Yeah,
to
it's a
fantasy.
complicated.
And
Yeah, it's a
to
complicated
me,
thing.
magical realism, I know it's called magical, but it's got nothing to do with magic. It's got, for me, nothing to do with fantasy. Like, it's, to me, it's such a wrong association to put magical realism and fantasy anywhere near
Hmm.
on the bookshelves in any bookstore. Laura Esquivel, Isabel Allende,
Yeah, those are not
Cortázar,
fantasy.
Gabriel Garcia Marquez have got nothing to do with any fantasy series you could think about. I think it's not strictly, but it's obviously a very South American thing.
Yeah,
And
it's something very specific of writers from South America from a very specific period of time as well.
mhm. And whenever anyone sort of mentions magical realism next to fantasy, deep inside,
You don't
I,
like it.
it's yeah, no, not for me.
Yeah, sometimes I generally struggle with sometimes with defining genres. Like
Mm.
I watched Angela's The Unicorns Read video on New Weird, and I'm still having trouble wrapping my head around what New Weird is. You know?
Well, it's I think the same issue I had with Susanna trying to explain to me
And Slipstream.
slipstream.
Yeah.
I'm too stupid. I think I reached capacity for new learning a few years ago. But swiftly moving on. So, just like everyone around here, you've got a lot for reading. Now,
Mm,
from being a reader to being a writer, there's a big jump.
yeah, it's a
So,
big jump.
what what prompted you to start writing? What, we all have a book inside, they say,
Mm,
but what got you
yeah.
to actually write it?
Honestly, I don't recall because I have been writing for my whole life. Like, I remember that I started writing some sci fi stories when I was 8 years old. And of course, they had age appropriate quality because I was 8 years old, but I really liked it. And I even remember that one of them I printed it and kind of like bound it. I was a child, you know. And but after that, I when I grew up and I was on my teens, 15, 16, I started a blog. It was at the
Mm.
start of the
Yeah,
century, basically. And
yeah.
I started a blog and I used it as to publish every week. I will publish a chapter, like doing web novels and so on.
Hmm.
And I had all my chapters scheduled and I will post them every week. And I kept on for years, basically for years. I think 6 years or 7. I did that. I didn't have much readers, but I just loved writing. And uh, I wasn't as thematic as I am right now when writing. I was more trying to write the stories that were appealing to me, and that case, or put up ideas that I have and try to wrestle them into a story. Back then, I was writing in Spanish, and which is very different to writing in English in general. And both creatively and technically, it's very different. And after that, I had to stop. Life happens, and I ended up relocating and everything. And during my work has always required me to write a lot, technically. So it's not something that I was completely, that I had just parked. I kept reading and everything, but I wasn't writing at all. And during COVID, on the first year, I said, like, I had a story that I have been writing for 15 years. And I have a whole thing planned for it. I have books of history planned. So I decided I'm going to try to write it. And I try to go traditional, but as everything that I write, it's not up to market. It's not, I don't write to trends to market. So I wasn't very successful. And at that moment, I didn't know much about indie publishing, because that's the truth. I was, the classical thing. I was scared. I didn't know how it would work. I didn't know if I could do the marketing or everything else that goes up with putting up a book and so on. I didn't know anything, so I didn't pursue it. So I left a story there, And of course, I have notebooks of notes and things about that. And I kept writing other stuff because, the bug had been sewn. I needed to write. And I have a bunch of novels, but it was actually at the start of 2022 that my partner, he's a software developer as well. He's a video game developer. He told me that he was going to make a game in which I could write interactive fiction, and I would have complete creative liberty to just write whatever I wanted. And we decided it was going to be fantasy and sci-fi because that's basically what we love to read. He did a different path, Lord of the Ring and so on. I went through Dune when I started, but it's the same idea. We both loved that genre. So yeah, that's how I started. And the first interactive stories that I wrote, which are not published, they were very difficult to write because it's not the same thing. And after that, I managed to get it. It took us roughly a year to get it done. And in June 2023, we got the app out on Android only, Unearthed Stories, which is free, and most of the stories are free. And that is how I started writing interactive fiction. And I'm right now working on a novella that I'm going to publish. It's not set in the world of that book that I mentioned that I have been writing. I have like 3 universes that I want to write, and this is one of them. But I wouldn't change writing in interactive fiction and books. I think they are similar mediums, but they are different enough for that the stories that I want to tell arranged better in one medium or the other. Basically, there are different things between them. So, yeah.
Okay, so interactive fiction. You're talking about it's an app you download it on your phone, whatever. So, in my severely limited brain, it sounds a bit like the old choose your own adventure.
Exactly.
Is it that sort of thing?
It's that sort of thing. Actually, my partner had that very same idea that he wanted to do that, which is not generally what you find in choose your own games right now. They are completely different. They generally have a character creator and so on.
Mm-hmm.
While the choose your own books, you were following a character's story, and it will tell you go to page, I don't know, 72, and you will just go to that page. So that's mostly what I'm doing. You get to choose a lot. So you have a few paragraphs generally, and then you need to choose, but it's always following a character, right? So you don't choose a character, you just follow their story. Sometimes you can pick their mood, but it's limited to the framework that I put up the character with, right? And that gives a different, it has so many layers of implications because on the one hand, as a writer, I'm seeing control to the reader to choose a story, and the branching, it can grow up exponentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like one of the latest stories that I finished on the last update, Means of Egress, it has 182 ways of going from beginning to end. And I was going insane writing it, right? It depends on the type of story that I want to choose, but at the end, it's always the same. You have a character that is already there. You may choose, for example, on Means of Egress, you can choose a genre of a character. In Dance With Me, you cannot. You just follow Lyra, which is a ballerina, and you can choose, in that case, the genre of somebody who she sees, right? Depending whether they are. But in others like me, you don't choose the characters. It's the characters that they are, and you just follow them. And same with Herald, which is the only cozy that I wrote. It's you play as a cat. And you follow the cat, and that's it. Yeah, it's a fantasy world in which cats are actually spies. And my idea for writing it is because I'm a cat owner, I'm completely subdued to my cat, and he was just doing stuff. And I thought, like, what if every nonsense cats do will make sense, will actually have a reason we human can't comprehend? And I created this whole thing. So in a part, for example, the character, the cat breaks a journal simply because he thinks it's a clue for something.
Right. So, and then, so when you write something like that, clearly, I don't know. You cannot have one idea of what the story is going to be from beginning to end, isn't it? Because you're gonna offer
Yes.
that decision tree.
But in generally, the type of decisions vary, and not every decision branches a story, right? For example, some choices can be only positioning. This conversation probably wouldn't change if I'm standing with the monitor and everything higher up of now that I'm sitting. The conversation would be the same. You just choose whether to stand or to sit. Though that is one type of decision, right? Just saying something very plain that doesn't really change. So in that case, you just split up to make the division in terms of body language for the character or the body beat or whatever they are saying, and then you just merge again, right? Somebody may react differently. You have a couple paragraphs difference, you merge again. That's something. But then there are other choices that can be different. There are choices that could be, for example, they grow on time. So in Mean, for example, you have an option to kill a character or not. That's a very grim story. You kill them, you have a whole story within it, but then for a few chapters, it seems that nothing happened, and then suddenly everything blows up. Those are the choices that I will call a stew on the plot a bit, and then actually make a change further down the line of the plot line. And then you have choices that, for example, and this is, I think, the tricky part, they can change who you talk to or the information that you have. So again, in Mean, you have a choice of going to talk with one character or talking to the other, right? The character you speak with, you have their information, you know their motivations and everything. The other, you do not. And not only your perception as a reader changes for that character, but it also changes the information that you have to make choices in the future, right? It may not completely alter the story, but may alter the choices that you're given, right? That's a different thing. And then you have, of course, choices that will completely split up the story at that point in time and send it in a line of its own. For example, Restorers has 6 different endings. So there is a point in which I always call the point of no return, in which you make a choice and everything else that you choose plus that, it just sends you in one direction. It may be an ending that has tweaks. For example, in Mean, you have 2 endings, and every ending has 2 or 3 variations, right? So the variations depending on everything else that you did, right? And the choice splits up. Mean in particular, that has that branching, the branching is generally done differently in every story. For example, in Restorers, which is a robot chasing knowledge, the choices depend on how much you investigated. In Mean, the choices depend on the motion of the character. So you can play the character as a very revenge-focused character, or as a more, I call that mode faker, more like imposter syndrome, basically. So depending how you choose, it will change the way she speaks, the character speaks, because it's a different way of reacting, right? And it reached up, of course, I think in chapter 10, the story completely branches out. So you have 2 different endings that are not the same. And when I was writing it, oh, sorry, my camera went nuts. When I was writing it, it was so difficult to keep in line, to keep in my head the character. I couldn't write both at the same time, because it reached a point in which a character was so different on one path and from the other, right, that they were 2 different characters. So I just wrote one line, then wrote the other, then tweaked, and so on. And that's a very long story. It's a full novel size, so 110,000 words. I had a whole list of choices and variables that I needed to track, because, of course, this is choice-based. If you talk to somebody, you have information that wouldn't make sense that the character doesn't think about in the future, right? So, but if I don't track the choices, and the information that that the reader knows based on the choices I took, I can create plot holes. Basically, I need to track all the choices so that I can be able to just bring them up together and make the character reason or think or act based on what they know. And what they know is basically custom, depending on what the reader chose.
So I can imagine that you must have some sort of written, printed diagram to keep track of everything, right? So the amount of
let me see if I can. I will try to show you one, but yeah, I'm generally a plotter, so I cannot write if I don't have a plot. But yeah, I start generally with a diagram of basically what I want to split up, when it's going to split up, and so on. And then as I write, I keep track of the specific variable names, because it's like programming. Every choice will have a label to say it in some way, and I have to refer to that label to know whether the person took that choice or not, right? And basically with that, I have one plot that is the one for the story as a whole, and then I have another plot line, which are basically the specific code bits, because they are programmed, that I have to refer to them. And yeah, it's very difficult. Me tying up everything was very, very challenging, you can imagine. It was.
And for someone reading the story, say, I don't know, they go down whichever branch they go to.
Yep.
Is there a point on backtracking and going down the other branch?
You can't backtrack. So you can't backtrack in these stories. It was first, technically, it was very difficult, and second, it will lead to exploits. People just choosing one thing, reading a bit, and then choosing the other, and trying to see which one looked better. So we didn't allow for people to backtrack. If you want to backtrack, you need to restart the whole story.
So my question was going to be then, does it provide, because you said, if you go down a certain branch, the character may only learn certain things or certain motivations or some information from certain characters. So would it provide a more fulfilling experience?
Look at this.
Oh wow!
Sorry.
As a proper.
Let me see if I can.
For anyone that is just listening, it's a proper diagram, like a programmer's diagram. Basically.
This is actually means of egress. So it's the whole means of egress is organized in rooms. So because it's a dungeon crawler style. So basically it's from every room that you can go and where you can go from where. And I also mark the points in which the story changes or acts. So it's very complex. That one was very complex to handle.
Yeah.
Sorry, it took me a bit to find it.
No, so like I was asking, so does it provide a more satisfying experience if you backtrack and then reread the story and take the opposite decisions that you took? Would you gain a greater understanding of the story or a greater meaning?
In some cases, yeah. In Mean, for example, I always say that it's so different because honestly, from chapter 10 and so on, it splits up completely there. So I just basically wrote half of the story twice. And that's the point of the branching. So in that one, I think that you need to play Revenge, which is a purple path, and then Faker, the green path, to actually get the whole story. Because what you find as a reader, the choices that you make are different. The information that the character finds is different. So some plot beats tie up in one ending and others tie up in another ending, simply because the character may not have found the information to tie these plot beats on this path, right? So, and in Restorers, for example, it has 6 different endings. They are very, very different because the story is very short. It's only 4 chapters. It's 13,000 words or something, so it's novelette size. It's so short that I went so haywire and I made very impactful choices. And those ones, if you play in that one, you can actually see how different the consequences are if you play one path or the other. However, in that one, it's not that easy to find out because in Mean, you have basically colors in the choices. So you can see the mode that you are playing, but in Restorers, you don't have. So you have to just play one. And there is one particular ending that it's very difficult to get. You have to follow very specific path if you want to achieve it. For
Right.
example, Dance With Me is different. That story, what changes within the story is whether you meet characters or not. It's you can always at every point of a story meet other people. Mostly in every chapter you meet someone, and you can choose whether you actually go and meet them face to face, or if you don't meet them at all. So you are mostly meeting people and meeting and learning about their stories, right? So it's a
Right.
different way on everyone. And in the last one, in Reflections, that's the one of the stories that came up on the last update. That one, actually, you can read it only once. Once you read it, the story will track that you read it, if you read it up to the end, and it will change. It will add knowledge. It will add pieces of text that weren't there on the first time, and you can delete those because now that you know, basically. That's the idea from that.
Okay. So, so there's an element of like clever
Yeah.
engineering coding going on there as well.
It's a lot. I will say that it's the stories are programmed, basically, more
So,
developed. It's very similar to writing because, of course, you are reading text, but in some cases I need to assemble entire paragraphs almost based on conditions. If a character weren't there, then I will say
mm,
this. If they don't, I will say this other thing. And if they did this, I will add this adjective or this adjective. So it
so,
gets complicated.
so I suppose the question is why? Why do it like that? Why have you chosen to write in this medium in this manner?
Yeah, as I told you before, it was because my partner told me,
All
offered
right,
me
yeah,
to
yeah,
do
of
this.
course, yeah, you
Yeah.
mentioned, yeah, yeah.
And at the start, I really had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea. So the first month or so, what I did was picking up short stories that I had written and never published and tried to make them interactive to
Right.
see how the story changed based on, I already had a very detailed thing that I had written, so I tried to see how the choices will affect it, how it will be different, and by doing so, I learned quite a bit because, for example, in a book, you can get away with a character entering a room and taking time to look around, right? In this type of a story, if I do that, then you will have a very long chunk swiping, swiping, swiping without any choice. So it's
Mm,
better if I take the description out and offer you to actually, I don't know, be all at the architecture or whatever, or going straight in and talking to the receptionist, for example, right?
okay.
So it depends on, there are things that you can get away on writing that you can't hear. Likewise, in interactive fiction, I think it's more like a game. When you are repeating the way the person interacts with the story, it gets very obvious, right? It's
Mm,
like, think of it like a game. You go and kill 5 monsters, then 10, then 15, and it doesn't matter if the location changes, you're still doing the same thing, right?
right.
In here, the same thing happens. So I also need to be tweaking, not only advancing the plot, but also tweaking the way the reader interacts with the story. And sometimes a scene may not work simply because the way the person is interacting is repetitious, it doesn't fit, or it doesn't, or the interaction itself doesn't give you the feelings that it should, right? So it has that other layer as well.
Right. So just to sort of finish off here, then, um, have you got so do you have beta readers, or is it just you and your partner working these things out, checking that it
Yeah,
all works smoothly?
beta readers, testers, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Whatever.
Beta,
Yeah, yeah. Whatever you want to
yeah,
call them. Yeah.
because
Lab
sometimes they
rats.
also, yeah, readers, testers, whatever. They also need to check, for example, sometimes I have let a path loose that you go checking decisions and suddenly you can't continue. That has happened to me during testing. And I need people to find out because there are so many pathways that just two people wouldn't be able to test
Hmm.
every path. So yeah, I have people that sometimes read them and they will do just reading the story or also testing the interaction to see if it actually works, checking for those paths, those loose ends that I may have left. The punctuation, it's a mess because because I am assembling sometimes sentences conditionally. Sometimes one sentence may have a semicolon, the other one may have a period, or may have a break and move into another paragraph. And sometimes I just leave them glued in without any space in between. So they also check for all of that, because let's just say that the punctuation is also conditional. To put it up simply, right? So they need to do a lot more than just read the story,
Layers of complication. And
yeah.
So what's the end goal? Is this something you've done because it was an opportunity, a challenge, a hobby, something to involve your time with? Or are you hoping, ideally, at some point to monetize this in some way, shape, or form and see where it goes?
So the app is monetized. Every time you want to read a chapter, you need to watch an ad. And if you don't want to, it's the only moment in which we show ads. So it's very non-invasive, which was a goal. You can either purchase, the app is free. Most of the stories are free. So you can either purchase the ad-free pass to read the stories without any ads, or there are some stories that are paid for, but they are very few. Right now, we have 8 stories and only 2 are paid. So Herald and Means of Egress, and they are very low, like 99 cents or 1.49 and so on. We want the app to grow, of course. It's something that, like, we have wild dreams. Like, for example, at some point, I would really like to invite other writers to write on the story, or to do like an interactive anthology or things like that. I have a lot of ideas about things. But little by little, because it's, keeping the app going, checking the bugs, trying to respond to some queries that we may have, and so on, checking. It has a backend to serve content. So there is a lot going on that we need to check, almost every other day to see how it's going. So it's difficult. And I think that the challenge that I have right now, it's difficult to write as much content as I would like to for it. It generally takes quite a lot to write one of those stories, simply because of you may say it's, 4 chapters, but it's actually a lot more because I'm adding all the options and alternatives and so on. I would like it to grow, as I said, to invite other people and so on. So it's not something that we are discontinuing anytime soon.
Okay. Livia, it's me, it's not you. It's quite late for me here, and I think that was a nice moment to finish the conversation here. But,
yeah, that's fine.
Before I shut this down, where can people find you, your podcast, your stories,
everything?
Sort of stuff?
Yeah. So in social networks, I'm on Twitter X, Threads, Instagram as Livia J. Elliot. You can go find me there. I'm generally more responsive on Twitter and Threads rather than Instagram. On YouTube, I'm also Livia J. Elliot. My podcast is called Books Undone. And if you Google by the name, you can find it in any podcasting platforms, iTunes, Spotify. It's also on Audible, so you can go and listen. And you can listen here in YouTube as well. And the app, the interactive fiction, is called Unearthed Stories. And you need a device to read it, so either an Android phone or tablet, or an iPhone or an iPad, right? So it's available for both Android and iPhone. So, and it's free. So yeah, go ahead and try it.
Fantastic.
And thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It was amazing.
No. My absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I'm sorry I'm running low on battery, but I really wanted to been meaning to ask you for this conversation for quite a while.
Yeah.
But I just waited for the right time where you couldn't say no. So anyway, thank you very much, Livia, and anyone watching now or listening later, whatever. Everyone, take lots and lots of care, and we'll see you next time. Bye. And that